Hope is essential reading for seekers of inspiration and spiritual empowerment. This series offers nourishment for those on a path of increased awareness at this challenging time. Inspired by higher sources of wisdom, Chronicles of Hope delivers messages to lift your spirit with a roadmap of hope and guidelines for living a life of expanded consciousness. The guides offer powerful insight for mental, emotional, and spiritual growth at this critical tipping point for humanity. The message is clear. We must change. We have the power to raise our vibrational energy individually and collectively before it's too late. I am Lois Herman, author of the best-selling Chronicles of Hope series and host of the Inspiring Hope radio show at WSMN.live or 95.3 FM. You can find me at loisherman.com or chroniclesofhope.net.
Welcome to Inspiring Hope with Lois Herman, a leading expert in professional coaching, clinical hypnosis, and energy clearing. Lois is an award-winning author of Chronicles of Hope. She has decades of experience in advanced hypnosis techniques, has conducted highly effective success coaching programs that have helped clients discover ways to achieve success, empower themselves, their families, as well as holistic practitioners to expand their practices. Get ready to be empowered with your host, Lois Herman.
Good, glorious day, and welcome to Inspiring Hope. I am your host, Lois Herman, and I'm here to inspire you with positive messages and celebrate people who are making a difference in our world. When we focus our thoughts and energies on truth, honesty, and integrity, we create powerful shifts that cause us to be more positive and peaceful. As we lift our energy, we empower everyone around us. If we each do what we can to make small shifts in awareness, we create ripples of hope. Join us as catalysts for positive change for our families, our communities, and our world at large. And I hope you're inspired by today's show. And my question today is, how many of you feel as if you've been here before? Have you ever had a sense of deja vu, as if you've been in a similar situation or moment? I certainly have. I have glimpsed dozens of my past lives and realized that I've grown much from recalling the lessons learned as I apply them to situations in this current lifetime. I also sense we're fighting similar battles that have been waged many times in the past. We are here at this pivotal time in history to win the spiritual war and conquer the evil that was cast upon us eons ago. Hold on tight to your light as we ride the wave of change these next few days, weeks, months, and years. And there's a lot of energy swirling around us right now, both negative and the excitement of positive. Join me in an exercise that our team has learned to do every day before arising and every evening as we drift off to sleep. We create our sacred space and set the intention for the day. Please join me right now. If you can close your eyes, that's fine. If not, just imagine, think about a purpley mist surrounding us that keeps us in somewhat of a stealth mode. And now let's imagine 8 columns or pillars of light surrounding our space that dive deep into Mother Earth and extend far to Father Sky. We're going to put a foundation of light underneath and a magical canopy or dome of light overhead and glistening walls of light connecting all of the columns. On the outside of everything, let's invite St. Michael's silver sphere to amplify the positive and deflect the negative. Send it away with positive intention. Let's put a high-pitched hum on the outside of everything that deflects any nefarious vibrational frequencies. Again, wrapped in St. Germain's violet flame, let's invite a little whiff of that violet flame inside for us. And inside, we're going to invite another column that comes right down over top of us, of beautiful light that fills our being with light. And as we breathe it in and expand it, it blasts out anything negative. And those negative things, they can go through the walls too. We're just going to blast out the negative. and fill with the positive light, and invite into our space the divine protectors of the light, the divine healers of the light, and the divine communicators of the light. And setting the intention that this show, this broadcast, is for the highest good of everyone listening. And I know that there are many that are concerned about humanity repeating mistakes of the past. And there are others that are hopeful that we will have learned from those experiences and make more informed decisions, better decisions this time. Some people have clear recall of their past lives and have encountered miraculous connections in the process. Today, our guests are star-crossed lovers who found themselves again as dear friends many centuries later. Their story reads like a magical mystery that only they can share. Louise Gomez and Lynn Everard have written a book that intertwines the recall of their love story with historically documented facts. The book is called The Reuniting of Two Past Lives, an Unveiling of 12 Sacred Lessons. It's a compilation of gifted insight and dedicated research based on the story of two people who trusted the intuitive guidance that led them to meet each other again. In a moment, they'll share their story of what really happened in Mexico over 500 years ago. You are listening to Inspiring Hope with Lois Herman at WSMN.live or 95.3 FM. If you enjoy our content, please like, share, and subscribe to our Lois Herman Associates YouTube channel. Sign up for our newsletter at loisherman.com and join our community at chroniclesofhope.net. And now I'd like to introduce our two wonderful guests. Louise and Lynn, are you there?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. We've tried a conference call. This is working. I'm so excited.
So am I.
So tell us your story. Tell us you're calling in from where you're in Florida. Is that correct?
Yes, we live in South Florida. I was living in Orlando, Florida about 7 years ago and moved to South Florida. And it's just, I guess, all part of our journey of, our higher selves, knowing that we had to meet each other in this lifetime. Is that right, Lynn?
Absolutely. I moved down here from Buffalo, New York in 1989. But like all of us in this world of free choice, we often have to be where we're going to go way before anything like that happens because there are lots of moving parts.
But the two of you had your own, somewhat of your own insight even before you met. So let's start with you, Louise. Tell us your story about even some of the things that you drew and knew as a child.
Yes, absolutely. So at 20 years old, I already had been to Mexico with a former boyfriend at the time. And I just remember telling him I had such profound memories, experiences, and feelings. I said to him at the time, I had another life. I was here before, and he kind of just looked at me like, okay, that's interesting. But it was just a feeling and a recognition of me knowing that I had been in Mexico many, many years ago, 500 years ago to be exact. And then I'd say about 3.5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago almost, going on now, I had a past life reading where one of the proteges of Dr. Brian Weiss did a past life regression reading with me, and she just started telling me about my past life in Mexico and 500 years ago, and I was a lover to a king, and I had this great mission that I was accomplishing, and just all these details. And I said, oh, interesting. Okay, that makes sense. I know that I was in Mexico 500 years ago, and I really didn't tell anybody about that past life reading. I kind of just was neutral about it. I just didn't feel overly identified with it. I just was like, oh, wow, that's cool. That's interesting. And then I started, I continued on my journey of self-discovery, self-realization, self-empowerment. I was doing a lot of deep diving, a lot of different courses, and Lynn and I actually met at a transformational course that we both did, we both did. And then come to find out, Lynn and I become friends, come to find out that Lynn tells me he had a past life in Mexico and 500 years ago, and all those facts actually aligned. Maybe you could tell a little bit about yours, Lynn, and how it aligned with mine.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had always had an interest in Mesoamerican archaeology. I was an anthropology major in college, excuse me, and I wrote a paper in 1977 about Teotihuacan, or maybe it was Tenochtitlan, but which that's college was over 40 years ago for me, so it's not like you save things from college, but for whatever reason, I had saved that paper, and I still had it, and it's funny because when I went through my journey, I always had this interest in Mexico, and when I'd been in Florida for a while, and I was in a Course in Miracles class, and I met this young lady there, and I don't know why I did this, but I walked up to her after class one night, and I said, you and I were king and queen in Mexico 500 years ago. And she says, yes, we were.
Whoa.
And we had agreed we were going to meet at a certain day and start writing our book.
Huh.
She never showed. And I said, okay, I guess I can let go of this now because it's not going to happen. Well, I realized after I met Louise, or after Louise and I made our discovery of our past life together, was I couldn't write a love story with a woman I didn't love, even in a past life. And so the reason she didn't write the story with me was because she was not my lover in the love story.
Right.
That turned out to be Louise.
Wow. So she was your queen, but we also know that, oftentimes in the royal lineage, they get married because of responsibility, not because of love stories. I have an interesting story, a similar story from Ramses that I could share another time, encountering Ramses and his love. But
that's what our story was that we were, our marriage, the queen and I, our marriage was to unite two tribes that had been warring against each other and competing for resources. And so our marriage was the unification of the tribes, but it's not like we had a whole lot of say in it.
You were like business partners.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. And then along comes Louise. Now, how did you tell? How did you end up meeting Louise in that life? Well, in both lives.
In that life. So I was a king, and the queen was trying to keep me out of her business, and her business was conquering other tribes and taking their land and their resources. And she was concerned that I was asking too many questions and might get in her way. So she decided that my clothes were pretty shabby for a king and that I needed a new wardrobe. And then it turns out that Louise, Jimena, in that past life, was a seamstress. And she ended up coming to the palace, and we met, and she started making clothing for me.
So let me just ask a question. The queen is still continuing with her tribal conquests, even though the two of you had joined. You really didn't join in business. She was still continuing on her personal interest. Is that right?
What she was trying to, the truth was that she was not really successful.
I see.
She was attempting to win the favor of her father, who she believed did not love her. And she thought if she did something manly, that would get his attention. But she really never had success at what she was doing. She just liked to pursue it and talk about it.
Right. That's an age-old story of daughters trying to win their father's attention. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So now you have this queen who is really more focused on daddy, and you have this wardrobe consultant who's measuring you and sewing for you, and it all was hand done, I'm sure. So a lot of personal touch.
Yep. Yes. Yes, because I had to try things on to make sure the fit was right.
Yeah.
And all of those things. So that presented some opportunities for us to get to know each other on what we'll say is a more personal level.
Absolutely.
But it also provided opportunities because Louise saw in me someone who could really be a king, but who wasn't being treated like a king by his queen.
I see, yes.
And so she started sharing these beautiful sacred lessons with me.
Okay.
And in the book, there are 12 of them. That's where the 12 sacred lessons comes from in the title. And each lesson presented an opportunity for deeper discussion and just this process of getting to know each other and just moving into this space of us falling in love. And the queen was just off doing her own thing. And as far as she was concerned, I was occupied. She wanted nothing to do with me, and she really didn't care.
And that played itself out in this life by her acknowledging that, yes, you were my queen, or I was your queen, but never mind.
Yes. And then she ran, then she disappeared again. Yes.
Right, yeah. Yes, hasn't learned her lesson yet, so that's okay. That's her karma. So how did you meet in this lifetime? You're from New York, and and Louise, you were from Orlando. You both moved to Southern Florida, and how did you guys end up meeting and finding out about your past, your similar past?
Well, we were both on this journey of self-empowerment, self-realization, and we were taking the same courses. So we became friends through the trainings that we were doing. And then a mutual friend of ours decided she wanted to create an intention group based on a book that we were to read. And so I raised my hand, and Lynn raised his hand, and we were both, and several others said, yes, let's do that. Let's create that. So I offered my clubhouse in my community, and then Lynn, I believe, had done that before, so he wanted to join to help us. So we became closer friends and got to know each other through this intention group that we were doing. And I don't know how much later, but it didn't last all that long. It kind of fizzled out. She actually got into an almost fatal car crash, and
Wow.
She was in the hospital for quite some time. So, Lynn had called me. It was right before the holidays, and we were to discuss what we were going to do for the holidays, up and coming holidays. Were we going to just postpone and restart again? And I think he wasn't feeling well the week before, and I just remember saying, Lynn, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And then I heard a voice say to me, it was an audible voice, say, I spent the weekend in jail in Mexico. And I said, oh, my God, if I tell him this, if I say, Lynn, did you just say you spent the weekend in jail in Mexico? If I say that, he may think I'm a little crazy, or he may think I'm a little off the wall. So, but then I remembered I just read he wrote a book, How to Speak Your Truth. And I said, well, he'll understand this because he wrote the book on how to speak your truth. I said, Lynn, I have to tell you this. I really thought you just said you spent the weekend in jail in Mexico. And he said, well, you remember I was a king in Mexico 500 years ago. And then he started going into the details, and it was like the light bulb went off. And then I just started crying because I just started remembering the story, and I realized it was I who spent the weekend in jail in Mexico, but it was this, all of a sudden these memories just started flooding in, and I had gotten goosebumps on my arms, and I just started remembering all the details. And It was from there, it was just like, I guess it was like the permission for me, just hearing him tell me that he was a king in Mexico 500 years ago, it kind of was like the green light and the permission for me to say, okay, this is my story. I said, Lynn, I think we spent a past life together. And I don't know, Lynn, from there it was like, a week of nonstop storytelling and sharing and remembering, and then we just decided we'd write our book.
Wow.
So we had that realization on a call on, it was Monday, December 16th of 2019, and the call lasted about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, and then we texted each other until about midnight as things started to filter back through, and then within 3 days, we had remembered the basics of our story, of our past life together. And then we started talking about it more, and then we still had to do something about the intention group, which met on Thursdays. And we said, well, we need to write this down. And so we allowed the attention group to die, and Thursday nights became our night to meet to start really working on our telling our story, and then ultimately deciding that we were going to write it as a book.
Wow. So I have to ask, why were you in jail in Mexico?
Oh, yeah. So that's interesting. I'm trying not to give away too many details, but I was captured because I was somewhere that the queen thought I shouldn't have been. So
the queen's jealousy got a hold of her. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
but I did escape.
You escaped.
I did get out and created a lot of great things, for the country.
And that was what's interesting. One of the things that's interesting to me is that this is more than, well, the love story is beautiful, and you also were instrumental in doing some pretty fascinating structural things, Louise. And from what I understand, Lynn, you also, so Louise would get information she would write, and Lynn, you would research it. And that brings to mind when I wrote The Spirits of Amoscake, Peter, that I wrote it with, he would research. So it was a similar type of a thing. We would have these journeys, and then he would do some research on it to verify some of the stuff. So you found some pretty interesting pieces of historical nuggets that are entwined in this story.
We did. One of the things we decided early on was that because the story primarily was about Jimena, who was Louise back in that past life, that it was really important to maintain the purity of her recollection, that she not be influenced by anything
Yes.
historical.
Okay.
And so I took on the role of the historian, but one of the things that happened right away was, and there's a connection to this in the book, but one of the things that happened 3 days after we made our discovery, marine archaeologists off the coast of Veracruz in Mexico discovered the anchors from the ships that Hernan Cortez burned when he arrived in Mexico to ultimately take over Mexico for Spain.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's funny because we had written in the story that when the truth of our story were to come to light, the anchors of the ships will be revealed and exposed.
Wow.
And sure enough, they were.
Well, now what
were.
do you remember? What did you remember, Louise, about Hernan Cortez? What was the real story? What was your recall?
My recollection was, this is so fascinating because I just remember one morning I woke up with a name. I said, there was a name, Don Ramon Castillo. And I wrote the name down, and it turned out that in the story, he was the one trying to really capture me, for the King of Spain. And my son said, Mom, did you ever research that name? Do you really know, like, if that's fictitious or a real name? I said, I don't know. I'm just writing my book. Well, my son researches, finds the name, finds the person, and that name was real, and he was actually on the ship with Hernan Cortez.
Wow.
So it was just amazing how a lot of these things came to me just in a download. I just clearly heard this name, and he was working directly with Hernan Cortez, and he was doing his, he's taking his command, so to speak, and he was the one trying to, quote unquote, capture me. Actually, they wanted to bring me back to Spain along with the, gold and cacao and silver and other resources, because for some reason, the King of Spain knew that I had certain creativity, let's say, to create things, and I was on the list. I was on the to capture list, I guess. So, it was just fascinating how certain things were very clear to me.
And you downplay this to create things. You created the aqueduct system for crop watering. Is that correct?
That is correct. So at 14 years old, I had been in Mexico at 14 years old.
In this
I
life.
had a very rough life. My parents had passed away when I was young in that lifetime, very young. And so I was working with I don't even know what to call her. She was just a medicine woman, a shaman, and a keeper of wisdom, let's say, through ancient lineage of the Aztec Indians. And I declared to her that I was going to create an aqueduct system to bring the water to the lowlands of Mexico, which that was the problem. The cities were not getting the water. So I had that vision to create those aqueducts, and because of my sewing and intricacy that I was learning, I was able to have these visions of how the engineering should take place. So I rendered those drawings in my cave of these aqueduct systems, and then this lady, her name is Chaparitza, she was able to connect me with certain people who had resources. So I was able to make the connections of connecting the people to the resources, and I was the connector to get everything done for the aqueducts. I had my sketchings and the engineering, and then she helped me to get the resources and the people to put it together. So it was a group effort, but I had that vision about the aqueduct system, and I didn't know anything about aqueducts in Mexico. It was just, and Lynn was verifying all this stuff and researching it, and apparently that is what happened. There were aqueducts, coming.
There was there was a double aqueduct system in Mexico City. The aqueducts that Louise made were not quite like that, but she had been working on all of this, trying to do it herself, but she still did not have the power over people to actually get them to cooperate with her.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I was able to do for her as the king was I was able to then provide her with the blessing of the king, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so that people who had been reluctant to work with her now realized that the king was involved in the project. It wasn't that I was doing anything in the project. It was just the fact that people weren't going to, nobody wanted to disappoint the king.
Mm.
And so that's how everything actually ended up getting done, was that we were able to do it that way. But she was prepared to do it herself. It ended up that she didn't have to, but she was fully prepared to do it herself because she knew that was her mission.
Wow. So you had the vision for the construction of it, but some of these aqueducts, and we're friends on Facebook, Louise. So you see that I am personally fascinated with ancient architecture. To me, it boggles my mind how these beautiful ancient structures are still intact and in place versus the crumbling crap that we create now. So you actually were able to use the resources and the people were able to configure and create these amazing structures. It's amazing to me.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, and there's more to it than meets the eye when you create these ancient structures. They used a lot more than just what one would think is regular engineering. There was a lot of sound frequency involved. There was a lot of lining up with the stars, and it had to be done on certain times where different phases of the moon or different lunar or cycles, they were very in tune with the earth.
And the energy.
So they knew when certain things...
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, they knew when certain things could be created and made.
Wow. Because if they lined it
very
up,
wise.
if they're using the meridians of the earth and they're tapped into the energy, then things could be moved, things could be placed, things could be arranged more efficiently. Wow. Fascinating.
Exactly. They knew that.
Wow.
They knew that.
Because
so in a way, they were more connected with the earth back then than we are today, because they had those key facts that they knew when things needed to get done and when they couldn't be done.
Right.
So they were very wise beyond measure, for sure.
And all of that was something that didn't necessarily show up on the surface of the aqueduct project, but there were places where you had to move the water from a lower elevation to a higher elevation,
right,
which typically with an aqueduct system that is starting in a river or at a river and then going inland, you're trying to create maximum elevation at the beginning so that then you can have the water run downhill.
Right.
But I believe that because it was so tied into the forces of nature and so tied into energy that it didn't have to have the significant change in elevation in order for the water to move.
Wow. Would that we could tap back into that.
Right.
So, Lynn, what
So
do
true.
you recall being king at this time, pre-Cortez? What was it like? What do you remember?
Well, it was very simple.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, for me as a king, I and I wasn't a king, and I think partly because the queen was so was like a warmonger. I was more about peace, and
Mm-hmm.
I had a personal servant. His name was Anake, and he and I would go out and walk among the people and have conversations with them. And I think that's one of the reasons people came to love the king so much, was because he didn't stay isolated in the palace. He actually went out to be among them because they were his people, and he was their king in the sense that he belonged to them.
Mm-hmm.
And he understood that. And so whenever he could go and have a conversation with someone that would brighten their day, that brightened his day too. And all the time this is going on, Jimena, Louise, is continuing to share these sacred lessons with me, which is part of the information was new and part of it was an awakening of what I already knew on some level, or maybe even in a life before that. And as all of that started to come to life, then I developed more confidence in my own ability to go out and speak with people and really, be kind of the not the king that lords it over people, but the king who is in service to his people and who understands the power of influence.
Absolutely. Wow. So I definitely want to get into the 12 sacred lessons, but I want to know also from your perspective, what happened when Cortez showed up? What really happened?
Yeah, it was brutal. Um, no regard for human life, just pure greed and wanting to just take over all the resources and whatever they were able to get. Um, it was it was frightening, and right before our pandemic here in 2020, I said to Lynn, I said, "Oh my God, Lynn, we survived. We went through a pandemic." And we were writing about a pandemic in our story, and lo and behold, a pandemic actually started to occur, right, Lynn?
Mm-hmm.
And we
Yeah.
were living through a pandemic in our story as we were living through a pandemic in real life. So it was quite interesting.
And the
And then
pandemic
there
was
was
was smallpox, right? That they brought
yes,
smallpox.
That's,
and it
that's right.
actually uh, killed about 25% of the population of Mexico
Wow.
City.
Wow.
Cortez had about the numbers of how many soldiers he had vary, but what he actually did was as he was moving his way inland, because it was quite a trip, it was a long journey over some mountains to get his people close enough to Mexico City to then, to start the fight. He was recruiting Indian tribes, Aztec-type tribes who were disaffected from everything else. Mexico City had a certain sphere of influence, but it did not control all of central Mexico. It only controlled a certain portion. So there were people who saw the king there as a threat, and then they signed up to join Cortez. And so that made his army larger. And then when smallpox hit, then that took out a lot of the Aztec warriors who would have defended Mexico City. And so it really set things up. And then, as Louise was saying, they were really brutal. They actually would capture the leaders, the kings, and torture them in hopes that they would then surrender and tell the people to surrender. So it was a very a difficult thing. Where we lived, we believed that we were in Oaxaca, which is would be about 100 miles south of Mexico City.
Mm-hmm.
And we were not part of the sphere of influence. In other words, we did not have to pay tribute into Mexico City, but we were close enough to hear what was going on there.
Okay. And you also said that they had horses. You had never seen horses before, so they brought horses with them on the ships. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Horses and weapons. And then what was his
Right.
whole point of burning the ships? I mean, it's terrible, but we hear this in motivational speakers from a business perspective. They use the phrase "burn the ships," which I've always thought was, like, yeah, that's not that doesn't sound, it sounds empowering, but it sounded backwards empowering. It sounded, again, about brutality. So what was the intention that you discovered? Because you did a lot of historic research on this. Stories,
right. Well,
yes.
this was actually repeated in our own Revolutionary War,
Okay.
a similar tactic on the U.S. side. But the idea of sinking the ships meant that the only option was victory.
Okay.
Defeat was if you weren't going to win, then you were going to die.
Okay.
And those were your two options. And so they felt that if that's what they limited the options to, that the soldiers would then fight as if their life depended on it, because it did.
Okay. But they weren't going back, so that they would fight to take over and to conquer and to take over this land. Is that right?
Well, they might have, yes, but they could have gone back. I mean, there was a year later, there was a ship that came from Cuba. Cortez actually hijacked the ships from Cuba. He wasn't actually supposed to go to Mexico, but he had other orders from the King of Spain. So the governor in Cuba was very upset with him that he left. And like I said, about a year later, they sent a ship looking for him. And one of the people on that ship actually had smallpox. And that's what introduced it into Mexico.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
So terrible upon terrible, which there's some parallel with what's going on now, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the greed evolves. It
Yes.
doesn't change, right? I mean, it doesn't go away.
Right.
As Lynn said, the King of Spain back then, what did you say? The King of Spain, he ended up taking over the Holy Roman Empire, right, Lynn?
Right, yeah. And then changed his name from Charles I to Charles V. And but he was really very frustrated within himself, because he hadn't done anything outstanding as a king that would leave him a legacy. And so he thought that if he could send someone to Mexico, because he had a seer that he was working with who saw you in Mexico, and he said, well, if I could get her, then she could give me everything I need to know, and I could win wars, and I could conquer people, and then I would have the kingly legacy that I want to have.
Wow.
Right.
So again, we've got the battle of good and evil that we're fighting now, that was fighting back then. It's the same battle, different era, different scenario, different scene, different act. But tell us the 12 sacred lessons, because this reminds me somewhat of the Four Agreements from the Don Miguel Louise, Ruiz. So what were your 12 sacred lessons that you outline in your book? The book's name, by the way, is
The Reuniting of Two Past Lives and the Unveiling of the 12 Sacred Lessons. And I would say the foundational lesson is that love is eternal. And we discovered that lesson at the end of our book. We realized that love as an energy cannot be destroyed or created, but transmuted and alchemized.
beautiful.
And so that's how we knew that we would somehow the love for each other that we had in that lifetime, we would somehow meet up again in this lifetime to share our story in our book about the 12 sacred lessons. And, you know, like I say, the foundational lesson is love is eternal. And we just want everyone to know that that never dies, or it changes, maybe from the physical form to more of an energy form, but it evolves and transforms just as water does.
Right.
Water can be ice, it could be snow, it could be H2O, it could be hail, sleet, right? It could be all of the above, but it's still H2O, and that's the same thing about love. You know, it can transform and change.
That's a beautiful analogy. Absolutely. And
well, it's funny because I got that analogy from Lynn one day. He told me, I called him up. He was in the airport coming back from Buffalo, and he said, "Oh my God, I just experienced in one day sleet, snow, rain, ice. I don't know, all these different things." And I said, "Yeah, that we're going to write a book about that one day." And really, we did, Lynn. If you think about it, right? The love is eternal is a metaphor for what you experienced that day.
Right. That one thing with multiple forms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So that is one.
In terms of the rest of the lessons, Louise, you want to go through the list?
Yep. We got the power of forgiveness, which is really a powerful one, and we also learn that in the book. Triggers are our gifts. The power of surrender, willingness to be open, speak your truth, trust your intuition, the power of intention, unwavering faith.
The power of intention is one that's really important to us because
yes.
every time we meet, every time we're together, every time we do something, we start with an intention.
Yes.
Because our goal is to be very, very intentional about what we're doing.
Yes. I start my every day, and I encourage this for people to start every day. When I set the sacred space in the morning, I set my intention that, the intention this day is to get help. I've been struggling with a grunge. I just call it a grunge. And my intention is to heal my body, my mind. I need to heal right now so that I can be of service to others. And oftentimes my intention is that I may be of service to someone this day. So setting the intention really shifts the energy of the day because you're setting an intention based on gratitude, based on where you wish your energy to flow, and it will go there, and it's magical.
It really is. I mean, that's how this book ended up being created. We started this book. Lynn and I met through an intention group.
Yes.
And so the intention group transformed into where we are here today, right now on the radio with you.
Yeah.
So.
And you were just at an event with my good friend Lisa Schermerhorn. She was down in Florida, and she posts on Facebook a picture of the two of you with her. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is my friend Lisa. What's she doing? She gets around. I tell you what.
Yeah, she was on our radio show.
Yeah, she's amazing.
And then yesterday I went to her Blue Talk.
Yes.
In Miami, which was terrific.
I'm sure it was. She's an excellent speaker. Yeah, and her whole book, "In Every Belief There's a Lie." So discovering your life purpose, that's another important thing because that's so critical to where we're at right now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things too is that Lisa and I are both why certified coaches, and so we actually help people discover their why.
I see.
And which becomes very, very helpful. And Louise and I, we didn't talk much about our synchronicities, but we'll share this, and that is that we've had so many synchronicities in the past 2.5 years, and one of them is that every personality type test we take, every discovery we do, we end up exactly the same.
Wow.
Like it's amazing.
Do they call
Yeah.
that twin souls? Twin flames?
I have no idea what we call it, but I know that Lynn and I work so well together in this lifetime as far as communication and creativity, and we always have a great way to talk things out. I don't feel there's a lot of ego involved
That's
when
beautiful.
we get together. Like I'll take constructive feedback as well as he does as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's part of a really working creative partnership, right?
And
right, Lynn?
it ties in with the power of
Absolutely,
intention.
yeah.
You also, the power of surrender. That's another very important message. I lead a group when we pull these little angel cards, and there's the angel of surrender, and some people go, it's kind of like the angel of forgiveness, surrender, and obedience. Everybody instinctively goes, ugh. But the power of surrender is really important to embrace. So how do you see the power of surrender?
It's so funny because I just had this conversation with my youngest son yesterday. He was working so diligently on completing his music, and then he had to download something, and then he had a computer problem for 2 hours, and he was just so frustrated and angry. I said, listen, we can be a victim of our circumstances, and we can fight it kicking and screaming, or we can just say, it's not meant to be at this moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
We get to surrender, and we get to not fight it, because I think the fighting of it, we think it's supposed to look, our day or our life is supposed to look a certain way, and we work, on our goals and dreams and visions to create that. But then sometimes in life there are things beyond our control that we just have to surrender, and it's so much easier and it's a practice. I'm not saying that I'm there and I'm like I'm breezing through it. All these lessons are reminders for me and Lynn as well, to remind us that these are the important things in life. And surrendering, sometimes we get to let go and let God and say, okay, there's something else that's meant to be happening right now.
And then afterwards looking back and going, oh my gosh, that couldn't have happened if I'd have been forcing my will upon the situation, right?
So true.
Yeah.
You got it, Lois. That is absolutely 100% spot on.
That's like I just created a course, the Light Training, Lightworker Energy Integrity Training, and it's based on, Archangel Michael had 20-something years ago come to me, and he said, you must ask for protection first, then healing, then empowerment. Well, those of us who work with energy know of the chakras and the color systems. So as I am creating this program, I'm looking at these 3 books that I had coincidentally created in their colors. Mm-hmm. And the first book is all about protection, and it's red. It's foundational. The second one is about healing. It's green. And the third one is blue. It's about empowerment. I'm like, holy cow, I could have never planned that. But then the God winks come through and they laugh at me like, yeah, well, we planned it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's part of the surrender, and then looking back and going, oh my goodness, isn't this fun? These are the God winks. So what are your last 2 on your sacred lessons? Because we have 1 minute left. Goes so fast.
Oh, yeah. So, it sure does. Radical self-love.
Yes.
That's another important one. And true unity collaboration.
Yes.
So radical self-love is, I think, the most important thing we can do is love ourselves first, and the rest will happen organically with the world. But loving ourselves, some people want to continually find love outside of themselves when really it's the radical self-love that
beautiful
we get to.
Thank you both for following through on your mission, and you'll be able to find them on the website and on the YouTube channel. Thank you both. And until next time, everyone, look up, stay positive, and be the light in someone's day. God bless.
WSMN 1590. WSMN 95.3 FM Nashua. Listen, watch, and stream at WSMN.live.